There's a pose that's often used in a lot of yoga classes, and it comes through a sun salutation. So lots of times you'll find them in a vinyasa practice, or sometimes they're called flow, but they really shouldn't be in a beginner's yoga practice. If they are, there's perhaps you can just understand that it takes a little time to do Chatturanga. And I know for a fact I had been practicing yoga for 15 or so years before I realized that I had been doing Chatturanga not so nicely. So the first thing, what happens is you will go in through a yoga flow. So you do a standing pose, and then you come into a forward fold, then you step back. So the first thing you always should understand is that when somebody says you can step, hop, or jump back to Chatturanga, if you're a beginning yoga practitioner, you don't want to be jumping. You don't want to be hopping. You'll want to step back to a plank, and then if you choose to do a Chatturanga, and I'll show it to you in a second, then that's your choice. But a lot of times what people do is they will see what other people are doing and try to do that same sort of pose, but not understand the complexities of it. So here is essentially what happens. So what will happen is you will have this, you come back into a plank. So if you step back from a forward fold into a plank, from here you'll lower into Chatturanga. Okay? So it's, again, it's very, very complex because you're holding a lot of weight into your hands, into your shoulders, and if you're not really strong, you might start feeling a little bit of sensation into all of your parts. So what you don't want to do, okay, and this is what I see in a lot of practices, is I'm going to put my knees down because it actually hurts me to do this, but you don't want to have the elbows go past, the shoulders go past your elbows. So see how my shoulders are lower than my elbows? That is going to put an undue amount of stress onto your shoulders, and that's not the best. So you want to make sure that the elbows and shoulders are in one line. And lots of times what will happen is if you're in a plank pose like this, they will tell you to move forward a little bit. Now see how my shoulders are going past my wrist here? This might cause some wrist issues. So if you aren't experienced at doing Chatturanga, you don't want to do this because it's going to hurt your wrist. Because see, what happens is from here, you come into a right angle. Okay? However, what happens lots of times is we get a little overzealous. And we think, okay, I really want to be good at yoga, or I really want to advance my practice. Chatturanga isn't going to wow anybody. Yeah, if you can do a push-up, then maybe your muscles are strong for Chatturanga, but your wrists ultimately are going to bear the brunt of a lot of the weight. And for myself, I know for years I had significant wrist issues, and I had no idea what they were coming from. Eventually, I developed a shoulder impingement, and so yes, you can be significantly injured in a yoga practice if you aren't aware of the subtleties that some of the poses will be demanding of you. So one thing that I've noticed for me that really helps in a Chatturanga and so again, if you really want to work towards Chaturanga, I would suggest you moving on your knees and then roll your shoulders back and then come down. So lots of times what we will do is we will come forward and we will collapse into our shoulders like this, but ultimately our shoulders should be kind of in their socket, and then you come down. So lots of times we see a lot of people just really like this, and that's not what it should happen. You ultimately want to really push away from the mat and then hold the shoulder, and then come down. And that's going to give you the pressure. But again, start on your knees if you really are that jazzed up about Chaturanga. So that's going to help with your shoulders. So that is one of the things that will help you with your shoulders and your wrist. Another thing that I found helpful is your wrists themselves, is your hand position. So lots of times what you'll see is a good, if you are going to a challenging vinyasa practice, they should be warming up your wrist ahead of time. So, so if you are in a beginning class, you shouldn't be doing heavy vinyasa. But if you haven't been to a vinyasa class and you find yourself in one, I always start the very first part of class when they say, oh, you do all your cat and cows, and they just love cat and cows and everything, oh, whatever. I always just warm up the wrist joints a lot. So you make sure that you put your wrists in either direction, and then do a little rolling in your wrist. So that's going to help, but so that's going to help strengthen your wrists and strengthen your forearms as well. And sometimes they do the popping, you know, just really to activate the muscles in your forearms. But what I also found is that if you put your hands too close together, like this, then what happens is it actually causes you to internally rotate your shoulders. This is what you don't want. What happens is when you do this, so you're internally rotating your shoulders, then when you try to bend your elbows, for me, my elbows get into my boobs, and that's not good. So what you'll do is you want to spread your hands just a little bit. It really matters like what the angle is between your elbow and your wrist. And you can see I've got a pretty big carry angle here. So what I do is I spread my hands a little bit apart and then press into my hands. So really activate the forearms, and the hands are going to be a little bit apart. Okay? So I'm really engaging my forearms here. And then you come down. So as you're coming down, you externally rotate your shoulders, put them into your socket, and then come down. Of course, the sunlight is starting to come in. So anyway, so if you find yourself that you are suffering significant wrist and shoulder injuries in yoga, it could be the Chaturanga that you're doing. So take a good look at your Chaturanga and check out your hand position. Make sure that you are really engaged in your fingers. So think about your fingers really clawing onto the mat, and then your forearms should be engaged as well. So working on those things are going to help. But also looking at whether or not you're collapsing into your chest. Your chest ultimately should be supporting, and your shoulders really shouldn't be under a lot of stress. So hopefully that'll help you into any future vinyasa classes that you have. But again, if you are a beginner to yoga, just know that you don't have to do Chaturanga to be able to complete any sort of vinyasa practice. So I hope you have a good practice, whatever you do. Namaste.